Search is not a tool, it is a symptom. If you start your morning by typing keywords into a search bar, your system has already failed you. We have spent the last 30 years meticulously building digital graveyards, and while we call them document libraries or shared drives, they are actually high-density storage facilities for dead data. The burden of discovery in these systems is placed entirely on the human employee. You are the one who has to remember that the contract was saved in a folder named Archive 2023, and you are the one who has to distinguish between Final V2 and Final V2 Revised Internal. And this is the reality of the old model, and it is costing you more than you realize. Think about the 9.5x gap. When you go home and use Google, you find what you need in seconds, because the success rate for a consumer search is roughly 95%. But when you walk into the office and try to find a specific clause in a vendor agreement on SharePoint, that success rate craters to 10%. That is a massive structural failure. It takes the average knowledge worker 20 minutes to find and validate a single document that should have been on their desk in 2. This is the hidden search tax. Every second your team spends hunting for a file is a second stolen from actual decision-making. If an analyst spends 2 hours a day navigating folders, they aren't analyzing, they are just filing. In a world moving at the speed of generative AI, this friction is terminal. By 2026, the companies that still rely on a search bar to start their work will simply lose. You cannot compete with a generative workspace if your primary interface is a scavenger hunt. The search tax manifests in 3 ways. First, there is the direct labor cost. If you have 5,000 employees losing 10 minutes a day to search, you are losing 20,000 hours a year, which is the equivalent of 4 full-time people doing nothing but looking for things that already exist. Second, there is the interrupt culture. Surveys show that 81% of workers rely on bothering a colleague because they cannot find information themselves. Now you are taxing 2 people for 1 piece of data. Finally, there is the risk. When people cannot find the final version, they guess. They use the wrong pricing, they sign the wrong terms, and they operate on fragments. We have to admit that our current architecture is broken. We built hierarchies for a world where people had time to go looking, but today, work does not start with navigation. It starts with context. If your AI strategy is just putting a chat window on top of a mess, you are just making the mess faster. You are not solving the problem, you are just automating the friction. To fix this, we have to move beyond the search bar entirely. We need a system that assembles the context for us. From assistant to architect. Defining the co-work engine. Most organizations are treating Copilot like a chatty intern. They open a window and ask it to find a file or summarize an email. That is the assistant model. It is reactive. It waits for you to tell it exactly where to look and what to do. But if you want to eliminate the search tax, you have to shift from conversational assistance to autonomous execution. You have to stop building assistants and start building a co-work engine. The co-work engine is a fundamental re-engineering of how data moves through your business. It is not a chatbot sitting on the sidelines, it is an architect sitting at the center of your workflow. The engine does not just see files, it sees the relationships between them. This is powered by a layer we call WorkIQ. While standard search looks for keywords, WorkIQ tracks the digital exhaust of your entire organization. It understands that a specific email thread from Tuesday is directly related to the PowerPoint deck you are building today and the meeting you have scheduled for tomorrow. It connects the dots so you don't have to. This requires multi-model orchestration. The co-work engine does not rely on a single brain, because it understands that different tasks require different levels of reasoning. It might use GPT-5 for high-level logic and planning, but then switch to a Claude model for handling messy, unstructured data or long-form documents. It routes the work to the most efficient model for the specific subtask. This is how you achieve a 13% jump in research quality compared to single-model systems. The engine is smart enough to know which tool is right for the job. But the output of a co-work engine is also different. An assistant gives you a chat response, but a co-work engine gives you an artifact. When you give the engine an intent, like prepare the quarterly audit pack, it does not just talk about it. It goes into the background and executes. It pulls the contracts from SharePoint. It grabs the latest pricing from the ERP via graph connectors, and it synthesizes the risk assessments from Teams. Then it saves a decision-ready pack directly into your infrastructure. It creates a co-work folder in your OneDrive that contains the briefing, the spreadsheet, and the deck. This is the shift from chatting about work to doing work. The engine handles the long horizon tasks that usually keep your team in the office until 8 p.m. It runs in the background for minutes or hours, providing visible progress updates and asking for checkpoints when it hits a high-risk decision. You are no longer the one doing the hunting and gathering, you are the architect overseeing the execution. To make this work, we have to stop treating all data as equal. Your co-work engine is only as good as the context you feed it. If you point a high-performance engine at a data dumpster, you will get a very expensive, very fast dumpster fire. We need a curated context layer that separates the authoritative truth from the noise of final V2 old. We need to move from a graveyard of files to a live conversational engine that understands the intent behind the request. This is the only way to scale. This is how you stop searching and start deciding. Layer 1, the structured context model. You cannot point a high-performance engine at a dumpster and expect it to produce a diamond. This is the first mistake organizations make when they deploy AI. The assumption is that if you just give Copilot access to everything, it will magically find the truth. But in reality, that approach does the opposite. It dilutes the intelligence of the system. If your engine is scanning 10,000 documents to find one answer and 9,000 of those files are outdated drafts, the model is going to hallucinate. It is going to give you the pricing from 2022 because that file happened to have more keywords than the actual contract you signed last week. To eliminate the search tags, you have to build a curated context layer. This is not about more storage, it is about authority. Your cowork engine needs to know exactly which sources are the golden records of your business. We have to move away from the all-you-can-eat data model because in this new architecture, we explicitly define what is an authoritative source and what is just noise. Your final V2 revised documents are literally poisoning the reasoning of your AI, and they act like background radiation that makes it harder for the engine to see the signal. The structured context model replaces this mess with a clean telemetry feed. We start by identifying the high-value repositories. These are the SharePoint sites that are locked down, managed, and verified. But we go deeper than just PDFs and Word docs. A true cowork engine integrates with Microsoft Fabric to pull in live business data, and it connects to your structured databases and ERP systems to ensure accuracy. This means when you ask the engine for a status update, it isn't just reading a static report someone wrote a month ago. It is looking at the live telemetry of your operations. It sees the real-time sales figures. It sees the current inventory levels. This is where graph connectors become the secret weapon. Most of your context lives outside of Microsoft 365. It is sitting in Salesforce or Jira or a proprietary SQL database. Traditionally, you had to leave your workflow, open a new tab, search that system, and then manually copy the data back. The Cowork engine eliminates that hop. By using graph connectors, we bring those external signals directly into the corporate brain without moving the data or leaving the security boundary. The engine simply reaches out, pulls the specific context it needs for the task at hand, and weaves it into the final artifact. The goal here is simple. The system assembles the context so you never have to look for it. Imagine a world where you don't start a project by asking where the latest version of the project plan is hiding. Instead, you open your workspace and the project plan is already there, updated with the latest notes from this morning's Teams call and the adjusted budget from the finance system. The engine has already done the hunting and gathering for you. It has filtered out the 500 irrelevant emails and focused only on the 3 that actually changed the scope. This is the shift from a graveyard of data to a living infrastructure. We are no longer treating SharePoint as a place where files go to die. We are treating it as a structured input for a reasoning engine. When you curate this layer, you aren't just cleaning up your folders. You are building the foundation for autonomous work. You are creating a map that the engine can follow to execute complex tasks with total precision. Once the context is structured, the engine stops guessing and starts acting. That is where the real power begins. Layer 2. Governance by design. A powerful engine is dangerous without a steering wheel. If your cowork engine isn't compliant on day 1, it simply won't exist on day 30. Most IT leaders fear the black box of AI because they assume automation means losing control. But in this architecture, governance isn't a restrictive wall you hit at the end of the project. It is the set of tracks the engine runs on. We are moving away from the old world where security was a manual audit performed every 6 months. In the agentic era, governance is baked into the very logic of the execution. This starts with the realization that permissions are the primary source of truth for the engine. We use Entra ID to ensure that the AI's eyes are exactly as limited as the human's eyes. If a junior analyst shouldn't see the CEO's compensation file, the Cowork engine physically cannot retrieve it to build a report. We aren't just setting rules, we are defining the boundaries of the engine's world. This is why the oversharing problem in SharePoint is the biggest threat to your AI strategy. The engine will find what is available. If your permissions are loose, your engine will inadvertently expose secrets. We solve this by making sensitivity labels and Microsoft Purview integration the core of the workflow. When the Cowork engine assembles an artifact, it doesn't just pull text, it pulls the metadata. If it grabs a paragraph from a document labeled highly confidential, the output it generates automatically inherits that same label. The security follows the data as it is transformed. This prevents the classic data laundering scenario where an AI takes sensitive information and spits it out into a clean, unlabeled document. The engine understands the weight of the information it is handling. It respects the access boundaries you've already built, which turns your existing compliance framework into an active defense system. Retention is also handled as a primary feature rather than a cleanup task. When the engine creates an audit pack or a project briefing, those artifacts aren't just floating in digital space. They are tied to your corporate record-keeping policies from the moment of creation. If your legal department requires all vendor-related communications to be held for 7 years, the engine ensures the generated output is tagged and stored in a location that satisfies that requirement. It manages the life cycle of the work it produces. This means you aren't creating a new pile of AI trash that your compliance team has to sift through later. You are building a self-regulating system that understands its own expiration date. Finally, we have the requirement for total source traceability. In a high-stakes business environment, the AI said so is never an acceptable answer. Every claim the cowork engine makes must have a digital breadcrumb leading back to the source of truth. When the engine produces a summary of a contract, every bullet point should be hyperlinked to the specific page and paragraph of the original PDF. This allows for rapid human verification. You aren't just trusting the output, you are auditing the process in real time. If there is a discrepancy, you can see exactly which document the engine relied on and why. This transparency is what builds the trust necessary for true delegation. Without it, you are just guessing. With it, you have an auditable trail of every decision and action the system takes. This is the only way to move from a playground pilot to a regulated, enterprise-grade production environment. The blueprint in action, the audit pack workflow. To understand how these layers consolidate into a single operational force, we need to move away from the abstract and look at how this functions in a high-stakes situation. Imagine you are a compliance officer at a multinational firm on a Friday afternoon when you suddenly receive a snap audit notice. The regulators require a validated pack of every contract, email, and Teams chat related to a specific vendor from the last 18 months. They aren't just looking for files because they want the full narrative of that relationship to see what was promised, what changed, and what was actually delivered. In the old model, this is the exact moment where the panic sets in. You would likely assign 3 people to spend the next 40 hours on a hunting and gathering mission that starts with searching SharePoint for the master agreement. Then they would move to Outlook to find specific threads where pricing was renegotiated, and finally they'd dig through Teams to find informal approvals hidden in side channels. They are traversing siloed systems and manually downloading files to stitch them together into a coherent PDF, which is the very definition of the search tax. It is slow, prone to human error, and incredibly expensive. Now let's watch how the cowork engine handles the same request. You don't start by searching, but instead you start by providing the intent. You type a single instruction into the interface to build a validated audit pack for vendor X covering all communications and legal agreements from January 2024 to today. That is the only prompt you give. And from there, the engine takes over while you watch the orchestration happen in the progress pane. It doesn't just run a keyword search, but instead it builds a multi-step execution plan to get the job done. First, the engine reaches into SharePoint to pull the authoritative contract. It identifies the version that has the signed metadata tag and ignores the dozens of drafts that usually clutter the results. Next, it switches to the Outlook skill to scan your work IQ signals and identify every email thread where that vendor was mentioned. It doesn't just look for the name, but it looks for the context of the audit to filter out marketing spam and focus on the pricing disputes. Then, it pivots to Teams to retrieve the specific chat history where the project lead gave the green light on a scope change. While this is happening, you aren't stuck at your desk. You can leave the app, take a meeting, or go home because the engine is running in a protected sandboxed cloud environment. Because it uses multi-model orchestration, it might use one model to summarize the legal clauses and another to categorize thousands of emails into a logical table. Every few minutes, it might ping you with a checkpoint to ask if it should include a conflicting pricing agreement found in a March email. You provide a one-word answer, and the engine continues its work. The result isn't a list of search results, but an actual artifact. Within minutes, the engine produces a timestamped audit pack saved directly to your OneDrive that includes a cover memo, a financial transaction sheet, and a consolidated PDF. Most importantly, every single claim in that memo is hyperlinked back to the original source so you can click a bullet point and immediately see the email it came from. What used to take a team 40 hours now takes a machine 10 minutes, which means you have moved from being a librarian to being a validator. The work is done. Layer 3, RAG patterns and memory design. The operational magic we just witnessed in that audit workflow isn't a result of the AI simply being smart. It is the result of a specific architectural pattern known as Retrieval Augmented Generation, or RAG. But in the context of a cowork engine, we are moving far beyond the basic RAG implementations of 2024. Most early AI experiments failed because they tried to index every single byte of data in the company, treating the LLM like a vacuum cleaner. But a vacuum cleaner doesn't know the difference between a diamond ring and a piece of lint, and if you let your engine search everything, you are just introducing a new kind of noise. A professional cowork engine uses a scoped and ranked retrieval pattern. It doesn't look at the whole world, but instead it looks at the right world. When the engine starts a task, it first identifies the specific neighborhood of data that matters, using semantic indexing to understand the concepts behind your request. It then applies a strict hierarchy of trust that prioritizes the golden samples, which are those documents we've explicitly labeled as authoritative. By narrowing the field of vision, we drastically reduce the chance of the model getting distracted by a 3-year-old draft or a casual chat message that was never meant to be a policy. But even perfect retrieval isn't enough if the engine has to learn your preferences from scratch every single morning. This is the biggest missing layer in most corporate AI strategies today, and that layer is memory. Traditional AI assistants are essentially amnesiacs because every time you start a new chat, the slate is wiped clean. If you told the assistant yesterday that you prefer your financial reports in a specific table format, it has already forgotten that detail. You have to repeat yourself, which creates a rework loop where the human is constantly correcting the same mistakes over and over again. The Cowork engine solves this by implementing a persistent memory layer. This isn't just a log of past chats, but a structured repository of accepted outputs and verified corrections that acts like a corporate learning ledger. When the engine produces a draft and you make a specific edit, such as changing how a risk score is calculated, the memory layer captures that change. The next time the engine performs a similar task, it retrieves that past correction and reasons that the user preferred this specific logic over the default. This transforms the system from a static tool into a live infrastructure that actually gets better the more you use it. This memory design also allows for the creation of golden samples for the entire organization. When the engine produces a perfect audit pack or a flawless project briefing, you can flag that output as the standard for all future work. The engine then uses that artifact as a structural template to learn the tone, the level of detail, and the specific formatting requirements that your leadership team expects. You are effectively training the engine on your unique business DNA, which prevents the reinventing the wheel syndrome that plagues most knowledge work. Instead of starting from zero, the engine starts from the highest point of previous success. By 2026, this memory layer will be the primary competitive advantage for enterprises. Your data is a commodity, but your corporate memory is proprietary because it is the record of how you make decisions and how you prefer to work. When you store these accepted outputs, you are building a repository of institutional wisdom that stays with the company even when employees leave. The engine becomes the keeper of the how we do things here manual, but instead of being a dusty binder on a shelf, it is a functional part of the reasoning process. This is how you move from a tool that helps you write faster to an engine that helps you think better. Measuring the shift, ROI, and the path forward. How do you actually prove that this massive architectural shift is worth the investment? You can't rely on vague feelings about productivity. The assumption that faster writing equals better work is broken. You need a concrete framework to measure the death of the search tax, and the primary KPI for the Cowork engine is time to decision. We aren't just timing how fast an AI can spit out a paragraph. We are measuring the total elapsed time from the moment a request hits your system to the moment a human has a validated output they can actually act on. If your team can move from a surprise audit notice to a finished report in 10 minutes instead of 40 hours, that is a structural win that shows up on the bottom line. One level deeper, you need to track the rework rate. If your employees are spending half their day fixing what the AI produced, your context layer is broken. A healthy Cowork engine should see a rework rate that drops towards zero as the memory layer matures, and every time the engine gets it right the first time, you are reclaiming the most expensive resource in your business. Senior leadership attention. That is the real ROI. It isn't about replacing people. It's about freeing your most talented minds from the drudgery of the scavenger hunt so they can focus on high-stakes strategy. To get started, I want you to take a baseline approach this week. Pick one high-frequency workflow that your team does every single week, like a status report or a vendor review, and shadow that process from start to finish. Don't just time the writing. Time the searching. Count how many different folders, emails, and chat threads people have to open just to get the facts straight. When you measure the search tax in cold hard hours, you will realize that you cannot afford to wait for the old model to fix itself. The 2026 competitive landscape will be divided into two groups, the companies still looking for files and the companies already scaling their decisions. The search bar is a relic of a slower era, and the future belongs to the Cowork engine. Your final homework is simple. Audit that one workflow and ask yourself, why are we still looking for this? If the information exists in your building, your system should already know it. Stop paying the tax, build the engine, start winning. So that's the strategy, moving from a search-based graveyard to an agentic engine that assembles context automatically. If this changed how you think about your data, follow me, Mirko Peters, on LinkedIn for the latest blueprints. And if you want more of this, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the 2026 generative workspace.